Good day, and welcome back to the Sussex Files, the only channel that opens the case, follows the money, and refuses to look away. If you watched episode 1, you already know that Harry was a psychological target walking around with a neon sign above his head that said "Pick me." Today we flip the lens entirely. Because before there was a Sussex, before there was a Meghan Markle, Duchess of everything, there was a woman named Rachel Meghan Markle. And her story before Harry is one of the most carefully buried, meticulously rewritten origin stories in modern celebrity history. And we are going to dig every last bit of it up. This is episode 2 of the Sussex Files. We are calling it the Reinvention Machine. And by the time this episode is over, you are going to understand that what happened to the royal family was not a love story. It was the final chapter of a very, very long plan. Now, before we go any further, if you are just joining us, welcome. Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell, because we are trying to reach 500 subscribers in 2 weeks, and the episodes only get more explosive from here. Episode 3 going to cover something that nobody in mainstream media will touch: how Harry and Meghan turned suffering into a commercial product. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe. Click the bell. Let us get into episode 2.
Over the course of 2025, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry experienced what many observers described as one of the most challenging years of their post-royal lives. It was not a single controversy or one damaging headline that defined the year, but rather a series of developments that appeared to build on one another, especially over time. From the underwhelming reception to With Love Meghan, to reports suggesting that Netflix had downgraded their deal, to allegations that charities were distancing themselves from the couple, and continued media backlash across both British and American outlets, while the overall trajectory of the year created the impression that their strategy outside of royal life was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. These professional challenges were accompanied by persistent internal changes, including the reported departure of yet another member of their public relations team, alongside growing speculation about the future structure and funding of Archewell itself. By the end of the year, the narrative surrounding Meghan and Harry had shifted noticeably.
Meghan Markle grew up in Los Angeles, the daughter of a lighting director on Married with Children and a yoga instructor and social worker. By all accounts, she was ambitious, focused, and from a very young age, deeply aware of the power of image. At 10 years old, she successfully campaigned to have a sexist advertisement changed after writing letters to companies and politicians. At a glance, that sounds admirable. But look at it again. At 10 years old, she understood that a well-crafted public campaign, aimed at the right people, using the right language, could shift how the world perceived you. That is not a skill most children have. That is a skill most adults never develop. File that away. She attended Northwestern University, studying theater and international relations, a combination that, in retrospect, is almost too on the nose. Theater teaches you how to inhabit a character, how to make an audience believe what they are seeing. International relations teaches you how power works, who holds it, and how it moves. Meghan graduated with both. She then spent over a decade in Hollywood attempting to break through as an actress. And here is where the official narrative starts to get carefully managed. The mainstream account is that Meghan was a working actress who landed a great role on Suits and was simply living her life when a prince came along. That version is technically true. It is also deeply incomplete. Because what the mainstream account glosses over is the decade of near misses, strategic retreats, and relentless reinventions that preceded the Suits years, and that continued right through them. Before Suits, Meghan had small roles in various productions, worked as a calligrapher for event invitations to pay the bills, and ran a lifestyle blog called The Tig, named after her favorite wine, Tignanello. The Tig was not just a hobby project. It was a carefully curated personal brand that positioned Meghan as a sophisticated, globally minded woman of culture and values. She wrote about food, travel, fashion, feminism, and social justice. She interviewed celebrities. She cultivated a following. She built, in other words, a public identity that was designed to make her irresistible to a certain kind of audience and a certain kind of partner. And then, when she became a royal, the Tig was completely deleted. Every post gone. The archive wiped. Royal expert Hilary Fordwich noted something that nobody should overlook. Meghan has ended every significant relationship in her life except 2. Her mother and Harry. Her first marriage to producer Trevor Engelson ended in divorce. Multiple close friendships ended, often suddenly and without public explanation. The women who were bridesmaids at her wedding to Harry largely disappeared from her life within 2 years. Each reinvention required a clean break. Each new chapter meant the previous one had to be erased. Now let us talk about the timeline that the mainstream media consistently refuses to examine seriously. Because the exits and entrances in Meghan's life follow a pattern that is far too consistent to be accidental. She meets Harry in July 2016. By October 2016, they are publicly confirmed as a couple. By November 2017, they are engaged. The Tig disappears. The first marriage is firmly in the past. The Hollywood career is being reframed, not as a decade of struggle to break through, but as a deliberate choice to pursue something more meaningful. The narrative is already being rewritten in real time. And here is where it gets devastating. During the period when she was still a working royal, multiple reports documented that Meghan's team had been in contact with streaming platforms. The Quibi meetings happened while she was still wearing the crown metaphorically. The Archewell Foundation was incorporated before the separation from the royal family had fully settled. For comparison, imagine starting the paperwork for your next job while you are still technically employed at your current one, being paid by your employer, and publicly declaring your commitment to the role. That is what happened, and it tells you something critical about how far ahead Meghan plans. Royal commentator Hilary Fordwich described it plainly. Every relationship Meghan has had has ended on her terms, when it was no longer useful to her next objective. Look at the pattern. The first husband served a purpose. He was a producer, a connector in the industry, a way in. When a bigger door opened, the marriage ended. The lifestyle brand served a purpose. It built a following, established an identity, made her interesting beyond her acting credits. When she became royal, the brand was retired. The royal family served a purpose. It gave her global name recognition, a platform, and a level of access that no actress or blogger could ever have achieved on her own. When Hollywood came calling with Netflix money, the institution was discarded. This is not a love story. This is a business strategy with an exceptional supporting cast. And the most damning thing about it is how effectively it worked. Because at every stage, Meghan positioned herself not as someone climbing towards something, but as someone being called upward, chosen, elevated, recognized for her inherent value. The actress who left Hollywood for love. The American who sacrificed her freedom for duty. The Duchess who walked away from the institution because her well-being was more important than protocol. In every telling, she is the protagonist of a story about liberation. What the story never quite addresses is the question of who, exactly, was liberated, and at whose expense. By the time Meghan and Harry arrived in America with their Netflix deal, their Spotify deal, their Archewell Foundation, and their carefully constructed narrative of victimhood and resilience, the reinvention was complete. The girl from Los Angeles who ran a wine blog and wrote letters to soap opera companies had become one of the most recognizable people on the planet, with a globally broadcast platform, a sympathetic narrative, and a royal title she no longer has to perform for. If you were writing a business school case study on personal branding, you could not invent a more efficient arc. But here is the question that nobody at Netflix, nobody at Spotify, and nobody at any of the award shows that faded her ever asked publicly. What is the real cost of a reinvention this total? Because every time Meghan deleted a chapter, someone else was left holding the pages. Trevor Engelson, who by multiple accounts was blindsided by the end of his marriage. The bridesmaids who were removed from her life. The friends who gave supportive interviews and then went silent. The royal family, an entire institution that was publicly prosecuted on primetime television. The pattern is not a tragedy. It is a method. And the people who got caught in it learned that lesson the hard way. In episode 3, we open the case on the most important question of the entire Sussex saga. How did suffering become their product? How does a couple that left for freedom end up needing to keep the wound open in order to stay relevant? That episode is going to expose something that no one on mainstream media is willing to say. If you want to be there when it drops, hit the like button on this video if it gave you something to think about. Subscribe if you have not already, and smash that notification bell. Thank you for watching the Sussex Files. The case is very far from closed.